Well, hi, and welcome to the Christian Contrast, where we talk about how walking with Jesus leads us to live differently than those in the world around us. And I'm Dan here with the solo episode, and it is now summer, or at least summer-ish for most of us. And so one of the things on my mind has been the whole idea of how we bring order to our lives. And maybe because when we enter into a new season, and for many of us, summer impacts our lives either because you're in school or you have kids in school, or because it's a season where there's a little bit more vacation and just the schedule is different. There can be this sense of sort of trying to figure out what does life look like during this season? How do we have order in our lives? How do we have order in our family? So you might be somebody that right now you're sort of trying to figure out what the summer looks like, but in a more general way, because these episodes, just go on YouTube and last for a long time. You might be looking at this much later and it's not entering into the summer season, but still maybe you're looking at your life and saying, I sort of feel like the tail is wagging the dog here. I sort of feel like I'm just sort of reacting and just sort of doing things, but there's not really order. I'm not really accomplishing, or at least I'm not convinced I'm accomplishing what I'm meant to be accomplishing, or that I'm focusing on what I'm meant to be focusing on. And so in this episode, I want to talk about just the concept of bringing order. And I'm going to do this by having us ask 5 questions, or giving you 5 questions to ask yourself when you're looking to bring some order to your life. And this is not just meant to be some idea of sort of like a self-help message here. When we think of the foundational thing that God created human beings for, the whole idea of having dominion over the earth, the whole idea of taking rulership, there's a sense of us looking at that in our own lives and saying this is a very human quest that God has given us to bring order to chaos, to bring order to disorder. So this could be for you. This could be for a child or a teenager who's in your life or who's in your home, who's sort of right now is entering into the summer season and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do. And these could be 5 questions that could be helpful for you to walk them through. But I'm going to walk through these 5 questions and just sort of comment on how these can be helpful to us as we're looking to bring order to our lives. And so question number 1 is, what are the non-negotiables that God has given me? A couple years ago, my wife and I did a breakout session for a parent-teen conference that we put on as a church. And we were talking about sort of priorities, and we were talking about being purposeful and the decisions that we make in terms of our families. And I don't think Karina had come up with this, but she suggested an illustration that we ended up using where we had a jar, and in the jar, we had different rocks outside of the jar. Some were pretty big rocks, some were like medium-sized rocks, and then a bunch were just sort of pebbles or sand. And the way we were using the illustration is to say, if you start filling up the jar with just a whole bunch of sand and a whole bunch of smaller rocks, in the end, you have a hard time fitting the bigger rocks in and they get squeezed out. Whereas if you start by putting the bigger rocks in, and then you just work everything else around it, the smaller rocks can kind of fit in around it, and the sand can basically fit in anywhere, then you end up, it's an illustration for priorities, you end up getting the bigger rocks in there, the priorities are then set, and everything else sort of revolves around it. And if there's some sand that doesn't make in it, that's okay. So we start with, what are the non-negotiables that God has given me? And so for most of us, that would start with things like this. Do I have a family? Am I married? Do I have children? Am I a child within the family? Do I have a family? If I have a family, the responsibilities to my family are non-negotiables. The things that God is going to call you to do are not going to undercut your responsibility, if you're a husband, to love your wife the way that Christ has loved the church. If you're a wife, to respect and submit to your husband and build him up. If you're a parent, to raise your children in the fear and instruction of the Lord. If you're a child, to respect and obey and honor your parents. We start with those. So you start with something like family. And then if you have a job or if you have school, you move toward that and say, this is where God has me right now. God has me working hard and being faithful in my job and making sure to fulfill my responsibilities. Now, as we'll talk about later, that doesn't mean that you need to do everything that is possible to do in your career, but just that you're being faithful with your work or you're being faithful with your school. And then we'll talk more about church also, but at the very least, you have a commitment to a church. If you're a believer in Jesus, you have a commitment to the church. That at the very least means that you are absolutely prioritizing, making it the rare exception that you miss a Sunday gathering so that you can worship together. And then it probably also means that there's at least some element of serving either on Sundays or at some other point. So you have those foundational priorities. There might be a few others that are clear to you right now. God has definitely called me to this. You start with those. Those are the big rocks that you put in first. And you look to move towards those without resentment. You look to move towards those with a sense of even joyful clarity of, hey, at least I get to start with things that I know God has called me to. There's an extended passage in 1 Corinthians 7 where the Apostle Paul, he's talking first about sort of, should you prioritize marriage or should you not prioritize marriage if you're currently single? But he broadens it out just to talk about the idea that we all have sort of different stations in life at different times. We all have different places that God has placed us. And it might have to do with job. It might have to do with marital status. It might have to do with, at the time he talks about, are you slave? Are you free? Paul says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 17. Nevertheless, each person should live as a believer in whatever situation the Lord has assigned to them, just as God has called them. You embrace the assignment that you have right now. You start with those big rocks. Question number 2. So question number 1 is, what are the priorities that God has given me right now? Question number 2 is, what are the high priorities God has given me? Or at least, what are the high priorities God is leading me to? So these are not non-negotiables. And I think I misstated. Question number 1 is non-negotiables. Question number 2 is just, what are the high priorities? The things that you're not necessarily sinning if you don't do, but they're higher on the priority list than other things. And so here, some of these might be bearing out some of the non-negotiables and getting into the details with it, but it might just be other things that God has set before us. So this could be friendships. We all need friends, but you might look at your friendships and say, all right, every individual friendship is not a non-negotiable, but friendships are very important, and friendships are often part of what God has called us to. There might be serving opportunities in the community or in the church. Now, we should all be using our gifts to serve somewhere, but we can't say yes to every serving opportunity. So maybe there's a few in particular that you say that the way that God has made me, the way that God has gifted me, and the desires that I have, that this seems to be a priority that he's given me right now. And so it's on Sundays with Life Kids. That's a high priority for me right now to invest in that. Or I'm serving with Exit 83 Student Ministries. I'm serving with New Commandment Ministry. But whatever it is, that there's a serving opportunity that seems to be a high priority that God has called me to right now. And there might even be some things within your career that are not non-negotiables with your job. It's like you're not failing at your job or being unfaithful in your job if you're not doing these things, but there are opportunities for you to advance in your career, for you maybe to make more money. And you could say, all right, it seems like at this time, this is a priority, not a non-negotiable, but a priority. It could have to do with your home and care for your home. It could have to do with your physical health. 1 Timothy chapter 4 talks about the whole idea that physical discipline or physical exercise is of some value, but disciplining yourself for godliness has value in this life and in the life to come. So we look at the whole idea of physical discipline or physical exercise and physical health and say it certainly is not as important as spiritual health, but it does have some benefit, and it even opens up opportunities for spiritual impact, because if you're more healthy, you're more capable of doing things. So and even within this, you might say maybe there are certain priorities in terms of just the way that you're seeking the Lord. It's a non-negotiable that we're looking to walk with the Lord, but there might be certain things that you're trying to cultivate. So you might be saying, like, all right, I feel like I want to journal right now, and I'm not sinning if I don't journal, but this seems to be a priority right now in my spiritual life. So you start to move those in. Those are the medium-sized rocks. You start with the non-negotiables, and you say, what are my non-negotiables? You look to identify them. You then move forward and say, all right, what are the priorities that the Lord has seemed to give me that should take some precedence? And then question number 3. Question number 3 that we move into is we ask the question, what needs to be dropped? We are all finite, limited creatures. And so if we're really going to say, I want to bring order to my life, it's wise for us to ask the question, what is crowding out the things that God has called me to? What things need to be dropped? For anything, right now, if you are looking to cultivate a new habit, if you're looking to add something to your life, something's going to need to be dropped. Now, maybe the thing that needs to be dropped is not a terribly important thing. Maybe it's that you spend a lot of time streaming TV shows, and that's at least in part what needs to be dropped in order to open the door for you to do these higher priorities. But the bottom line is something needs to be dropped. What are the things that need to be dropped or at least limited? Is there a hobby that you have so prioritized that it is squeezing out, is choking out the opportunities that you would otherwise have for some of these bigger priorities? And it doesn't mean that the hobby needs to completely go. It may just mean that the hobby needs to be limited so that it's in order. And then, man, we have just so many time wasters in our culture right now. We have so much time that we can just spend sitting around, scrolling, watching, frittering away our lives. If you're a teenager or if you have a teenager in your home, man, this could be the summer. The summer could just be sort of frittering it away. Man, when I was a kid, we had TV and I probably did watch too much TV as a kid. But there was just less things that made us want to sit inside because there wasn't as much cool stuff to do by just staying at home. So we frequently would get out just to have something interesting to do. And now with all of our devices, we can easily just scroll away and waste away our summer. You can waste away a season, you can waste away a weekend, you can waste away an evening, you can waste away a lot of time that could be spent doing better things. So what needs to be dropped? Is it a hobby that needs to be dropped down? Is it a time waster? Is it something where within your job, you're doing everything that you need to do to be faithful, but you've kind of been on overdrive trying to make everything, trying to say yes to every opportunity? Are there some of those that need to be dropped because those are taken away from bigger priorities? Even some of you with the church, man, there's some of you that you might be looking to be at every Bible study and at every activity, and we often encourage people not to do that. Say, give your life some focus. You might be at multiple things. You might be part of multiple groups, and that's fine, but give your life some focus. Don't do everything. Do a few things and do them well and give yourself to them. So what is it that needs to be dropped? And part of this might end up with you just, like laying out, either a Google Calendar or a sheet of paper and just writing down, here's how I'm actually spending my time. And that might bring some clarity to say, well, man, if I eliminated this or if I limited this, that would really open up the door for things that are more significant. So question number 1, what are the non-negotiables God has given me? Question number 2, what are the high priorities God has given me? Question number 3, what needs to be dropped? Question number 4 is really important to me. Question number 4 is, what will I actually do? And what I mean by this is that there are times that we make these giant vows about profound life change and habit change. And I think it's worth just pausing to ask the question, all right, what am I likely to actually do? And I remember being in high school, and every time I would go to summer or winter camp with our youth group, which I loved all those. I loved my youth group. I'd get back, and it would be the same with me and the same with most of my friends, where we'd get back and it would be like, I'm never going to sin again. I'm going to read my Bible every day. I'm going to pray for an hour every day. I'm going to share the gospel with every friend. I mean, there were just all of these vows, and there's something good. There was something positive about the energy from all of that. But what would usually happen is like 4 days later, we would have absolutely abandoned all of those. And it wasn't because we were like hard-hearted, shaking our fist at God. It's because we were trying to go from 0 to 60 so quickly. We were trying to just go from like, I haven't read my Bible pretty much at all for the last 6 months, and now I'm going to read it every day, and I'm going to read 3 chapters every day. And man, my prayer life is just sort of a quick prayer before meals, but now I'm going to pray for an hour every day. It's okay to back up and to ask the question, what will I actually do? It's okay to get a foot in the door. In 1 Timothy 4, Paul talks to Timothy about the idea that the congregation that he's pastoring, they should see his progress. Let your progress be evident to all. Think about this. We grow incrementally. This is true physically, and this is true spiritually. Even when we think of the whole concept of the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5, fruit grows gradually. And so for some of you, you're hearing what I'm saying, and you might be thinking like, well, this kind of seems like you're saying, hey, lower the bar. Like lower the bar and settle for mediocrity. And that's not what I'm trying to say. But I've just seen too many people that say, I'm going to read the Bible every day, and then they fail to do it because they haven't been in the habit of doing it. And because they fail to do it every day, they just feel like there's no point in reading the Bible at all. Maybe you're not reading the Bible at all. Maybe you're not praying really with any kind of consistency, and you're saying, God wants me to bring some order to my life. He wants this for me. I want this for me. I want to cultivate this. There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm going to look to read one chapter of the Bible at least 3 times this week. And you can listen to that and say, but it should be 7 days. Yes, it should be 7 days. And there are a lot of people that do 7 days, and you can get to 7 days. That is a very reasonable place that you want to aim at. But man, if you haven't been doing that, ask the question, what will I actually do? I remember a while ago, I decided for a season of time to journal regularly. And starting off, I was kind of doing the post-camp thing where I was like, I'm going to journal every day. And then thankfully, I paused and I said, no, I'm not. I'm not. I know myself, I won't do that. And what will happen is because I'll miss a few days, I'll just abandon the whole project. And so I decided I'm going to journal 3 days a week. And I even chose the days because I looked at my week and said, when am I likely to actually follow through on this? When are the times that it will actually sound good to me to do this? And I ended up finding great success and consistency because of that. It's okay to ask the question, what will I actually do? Set yourself up for an attainable goal to make progress. And the goal is not necessarily that, hey, now you're reading the Bible with some consistency 3 days a week. Would it be good to get to 7 days a week? Absolutely. But man, if you have 3 days a week that are now a solid habit, it's going to be that much easier to add in a 4th and a 5th and a 6th and a 7th. So ask the question, what will I actually do? Allow yourself to get a foot in the door. A smaller amount of time seeking the Lord and experiencing these positive habits is going to go further than a great vow that gets abandoned quickly. So what are the non-negotiables God has given me? What are the high priorities He's given me? What needs to be dropped? What will I actually do? And finally, the 5th question is, how can I do this in community? When you read the New Testament, and there's so much about what people often call the one another's, that we're encouraging one another, that we're loving one another, that we're building one another up, that we're even confessing sins to one another. And so part of this, when I ask about how can you do this in community, there's an element, at least for some of us, that we'd say, well, I can have somebody hold me accountable. Like I can have an accountability partner to ask me the questions. Hey, like, did you read the Bible the way that you've been talking about reading the Bible? How much time have you been spending on your phone because you decided to limit the time on your phone or limit the time streaming things? Like, did you follow through and sign up to serve in this area? Something like that. So it could be that somebody is an accountability partner, but even more broadly, I think. In our culture right now, for the vast majority of us, as we're thinking about doing what God has called us to do, for most of us, that's going to mean more time moving toward other people and spending with other people. There are probably some of you listening to this that you're constantly with other people and you need to find some time for solitude with the Lord. But man, for most of us, we're not spending too much meaningful time with other people, because we're able to entertain ourselves completely while we're cut off from everyone else. So some of bringing order to our lives is just figuring out ways that we're around people who are also seeking the Lord and who can build us up. Maybe if you're looking to get into reading the Bible, maybe part of what you do is you find a friend who also wants to do this, and you decide that once a week you're going to get together at a certain time, and you're both just going to sit together and individually read the Bible, and then spend a little time talking about it afterwards. Maybe this is a good use of technology. Maybe you get on FaceTime and you just do it on FaceTime, and we say, hey, we're just going to have this open, and we're just going to both be doing this, and we're just going to be there for each other and maybe talk about it a little bit afterwards. How can community be a part of this? How can this be not just some private decisions that you're looking to do and you're looking to do on your own, but that you're involving the community of believers in this so that we build one another up and so that we have the support and encouragement from one another. So that you have the times when you do fall short to be able to acknowledge, man, this last week, I didn't do any of the things that I said I was going to do. And you can have a friend, on the one hand, receive you with grace and show there is grace to be had. And on the other hand, encourage you to say, don't let the failures of this last week keep you from leaning into what God has called you to do. So if we're looking to bring some order to our lives, I think these 5 questions can be really helpful. If you're married, you might want to ask these 5 questions together. If you want to do this in community, you might want to sit down and ask this question together with a good friend. What are the non-negotiables that God has given me? The things that he has absolutely called me to do, prioritize them. Now, what are the high priorities that aren't a matter of sin and obedience necessarily, but are just a matter of these appear to be important things God has placed on my plate? Prioritize those also. What has God called me to drop? Something's got to go. What will I actually do with where I'm at? God is a good father, and a good father knows his children and knows that we have limitations. What will I actually follow through on? And finally, question number 5, how can I involve community in this? And what a great thing if this summer we ended up seeking the Lord and bringing more order to our lives and doing it in a way that we're doing it together and building up one another, because that's going to have fruit not just for this season, but for far beyond it. Hey, if you have thoughts, questions, feedback, ideas, suggestions, anything like that, you can feel free to leave a comment on this video. I always encourage that. I like to go back and look at the comments or the questions and interact if there's going to be something helpful that I can do. All the videos of the Christian Contrast are on our YouTube channel for Life Bible Fellowship Church, and they're also on our website, lbf.church. And so if you enjoyed this or found this fruitful, you can go back and we have lots and lots of episodes that you can watch, because we want to build people up to live in a way that's different than the world around us, because we're following Jesus with all our hearts. So we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Until then, thanks so much for taking the time to listen.